How we doing? Good to see all of you. Glad that you're here today. I want to welcome those of you joining us from our campuses and also Ada Bible Church online. Whatever you're doing, wherever you are, thanks for being here with us. And hey, my name's Aaron. Maybe we haven't met, and I'm a teaching pastor here and director of student ministries, and just so privileged for this opportunity to open the scriptures with you today. And I want to let you know that next weekend, Pastor Jeff will be with us as we wrap up this series, Dinner with Jesus. And then in August, we're going to kick off a brand new series, 4-week series called The Power of Words. And so I hope that you join us for that series as well. But today, as we jump into Dinner with Jesus, I want to start out by asking you a question. You ever do the wrong thing at the wrong time? In a social situation? Who's with me? Been there? Okay, yeah, these things happen. Imagine you're at the movie theater with your family, you're sitting there enjoying your popcorn, and then a couple rows in front of you, cell phone rings. Guy answers it. Hello? Oh yeah, I'm at the movies. No, it's cool. Excuse me. It is definitely not cool, sir, for you to answer your phone at the movie. I spent $450 to bring my family of 5 to the movies. Do not answer your phone, sir. Wrong thing, wrong time. You're at dinner, new couple you're getting to know, and you're sitting around the table. It looks delicious. They got corn on the cob, and it's summertime. It's just the best. And the host is like, all right. And you take that corn, you take a big bite of it, and that's when you hear, dear God, thank you for the food. What are you gonna, wrong thing at the wrong time. How are you gonna flip the corn over? Maybe they won't notice, you know? Sometimes you do the wrong thing at the wrong time. Sometimes you say the wrong thing at the wrong time. There is a question that you really should never ask unless you're like 1,000% sure that you're correct on this one. You know where this is going? So, when are you due? I'm not pregnant. When are your taxes due? Like, you know, property taxes. Mine are due in September. There's really no recovery, and you say the wrong thing at the right, you're gonna just have to live with the consequences of that one. The reason I bring this up is our story today, a dinner with Jesus. Somebody is gonna do the wrong thing at the wrong time. So in this series, we've been exploring dinners with Jesus in the Gospel of Luke. And today we find Jesus, he's been teaching the crowds. And as he's wrapping up, he gets invited over for lunch. So Luke chapter 11, if you want to follow along, this is what happens. Jesus had finished speaking, and a Pharisee invited him to eat with him. So he went in and reclined at the table. Now, if you're new to the Bible, a Pharisee, in first century Israel, it's like a religious leader of the people, very, very devoted to their faith, highly respected, and as we'll find out, often in conflict with Jesus. And we read that he went in to eat with them and reclined at the table. Now, some of you are having an idea right now, like, I could put a recliner at the dining room table. That's not what this is about, okay? Here's an image. In the first century, this is definitely a Roman custom that often actually also happened in Israel, especially in the upper classes. But you would lay down on these cushions kind of on your side. The table would be much lower. And this is what it looked like kind of to recline at the table. So it kind of gives you a picture of what's going on at this lunch with a Pharisee. Now, I told you that somebody's going to do the wrong thing at the wrong time. So what is that? What's going to happen? Well, check this out. The Pharisee was surprised when he noticed that Jesus did not first wash before the meal. Now, those of you who are germaphobes are like, no, not Jesus. He didn't wash his hands? Come on. Actually, this is an entirely different thing. We're not talking about, soap and water getting the germs off. This is something that was called a ceremonial hand washing. And the way this would work is ancient Jews would have a pitcher of water, something like this, and you would pour water down your fingers and down your arm, and then you would do it again down the arm and over the fingers. And it was a ceremonial cleansing It was like about purity. You see, there was this belief, this understanding among the ancient Jews, and especially with the Pharisees, that your physical cleanliness or purity, like on the outside, your body, your physical purity sort of prepared the way for you to approach God. There's a connection between your physical cleanliness and your total cleanliness to approach a holy and pure God. And so this is what they believed. This is why they did this ceremonial hand washing. And the Pharisees were like dead serious about this. And they followed all kinds of different ceremonial cleansing practices in order to make themselves pure before God. So it was a big deal to them. And Jesus walks into this lunch and he just skips it. It's like he sends this very clear nonverbal message to the Pharisee. Yeah, that whole hand washing thing, not important. Not important. And then the Pharisee sends a very clear nonverbal message back to Jesus. I am appalled. And then Jesus sends a very clear nonverbal message back to the Pharisee. Oh, you want to go there? And what happens is, over this lunch, where likely they were sharing food out of the same dish, Jesus proceeds to drop the thunder on this guy and Pharisees in general. It's like he leans across the table and says, you guys think you're the religious leaders of this people. Well, let me tell you something. You are missing it. You are so missing it. And I know what you're thinking. Oh, this is going to be fun. This is going to be good. Jesus lighting up the Pharisees, because as you read through the gospel stories, these guys, the Pharisees, they're like the worst. And so listening to Jesus light them up and tell them where they're missing, this will be fun. This will be interesting. Now, I have a challenge for you. Let's think about who the Pharisees were and what they were really all about. Because the Pharisees were deeply devoted to God, passionate about understanding and teaching the scriptures, deeply devoted to living right, to prayer, to financial tithing, deeply devoted to all these things, and also deeply concerned about moral decline in their nation. Question, does this sound familiar? You see, I think it's helpful when we read the scriptures to ask the question, okay, where am I in the story? Where do I find myself in this story? And I'll give you a hint, you're probably not Jesus, just saying. As I read this story, I can't help but to think that the Pharisees are a lot like me, people like me, church people who are passionate about the scriptures, devoted to God. I think if there's a parallel between people in our culture and people who were Pharisees in the first century, it's probably evangelical Christians like us. And so here's the real challenge. This is a dinner with Jesus, and unlike some of the other stories we've been exploring in this series, this is not a table of fellowship. It's not a table of invitation into relationship with Jesus. This is a table of correction. Jesus will have harsh words for these Pharisees. And the challenge is, are you willing to sit in the place of the Pharisee and listen to the words of Jesus with an open heart? Because it's so much easier to read a story like this and just go, man, these Pharisees, man, what a bunch of idiots. But so much more helpful and painful to go, okay, where do I do that? Where do I act like the Pharisees in my life? And if you're willing to do that, if you're open to the fact that you might be missing it somewhere, I think this could be a life-changing conversation. And so here's where we're headed. Jesus is going to use 4 images to reveal to this Pharisee how he is missing it. And so we're going to explore each of these 4 images. And the first one is the dishes. Jesus arrives at this guy's house. He just skips the ceremonial hand washing. The Pharisees offended, and now Jesus is going to start in tough words about the dishes. Here's what he says. The Lord said to him, "Now then, you Pharisees, you clean the outside of the cup and the dish," and what's implied is, but you don't clean the inside. It's a scene, you're at the kitchen sink, you're washing the dishes, you got the soapy water, and you're cleaning the outside. You look at the inside, it's dirty, and you're like, nah, no need. And it just reminds me of this reoccurring conversation I have with my kids about guacamole. See, we eat a lot of guacamole in my house. Anybody with me? Stuff is delicious, right? And this is the reoccurring conversation. Now, kids, when you finish your bowl of guacamole, take it to the sink and rinse it out, because if you don't, within the hour, that guacamole will turn into brown cement. Cement. Guaca cement will be in that bowl, and you'll never be able to get it out. Imagine you have a bowl like that, you kind of wipe off the outside, and then you pour your cereal and milk into the same bowl in the morning. It'd be disgusting. You wouldn't do that. Jesus is like, you clean the outside of the cup, but you don't clean the inside. He says to them, "Now then, you Pharisees, clean the outside of the cup and the dish, but the inside you are full of greed and wickedness." The inside does not match the outside. It's dirty in there. It's ugly in there. It's dark in there. This word he uses, greed. Interesting word. It has to do with like plundering and robbery. It's like on the outside you look so good, but inside there's this motivation that I'm going to get what I want, and it doesn't matter what it costs you. And wickedness, it's dark in there. The outside doesn't match the inside. And there's a word that Jesus used often to describe this, a word that he attached to the Pharisees. And it's a word that he borrowed from Greek and Roman theater. So here's a theater. This is Epidaurus Greek. It's one of the most intact and beautiful theaters in the world. And it was in places like this in the ancient world that actors and actresses would perform and put on plays. And there was a technical name for a Greek actor. And that name was, maybe you know this, hypocrite. This word, we get the word hypocrite. It's a word that Jesus used to describe the Pharisees. You're a hypocrite, you're acting. Because hypocrites often wore masks like this. And the deal with a mask is like who you are on the outside is not who you are on the inside. Jesus says you clean the outside, but you don't clean the inside. It's dark in there. It's messy in there. Now, it's moments like this where we're tempted to just go, geez, the Pharisees, you gotta be kidding me. These guys are the worst. But it's so much more helpful and, yes, painful to go, okay, where do I do that in my life? So can we talk about the masks? Can we talk about the masks that we wear? The mask of success. The career is solid. The house, the car, the money. People look at your life and it's like, you got everything. You've got it all going on. But underneath that mask is this emptiness in your heart. None of these things that you have seem to be able to satisfy. It's like you look at the outside, it is a good show. But the inside doesn't match what's going on the outside. Can we talk about the mask of appearance? The compliments you get, always so put together, style, fashion, beautiful. But beneath the mask are deep insecurities, unhappiness, anxiety, worry. It's like on the outside, it is a good show, but it doesn't match what's going on the inside. I think there's even a mask of faith, of devotion to faith, that people look at your life and it's like, man, that is a good woman. That is a solid dude right there. But beneath that mask, there lurks an addiction that could just destroy everything in your life. It's like on the outside, it's a good show, but does not match what's going on, the darkness that's going on the inside. The mask of respectability, people look at your family and it just all looks put together. White house, picket fence, dog, 2 kids. I mean, it's just like, man, they are perfect. But beneath that mask is a marriage that is crumbling, falling apart. It's a good show on the outside, but it does not match what's going on the inside. We do this. We wear masks in the same way that the Pharisees did. And there's like, if we can just keep up appearances, if we can just keep the mask on, everything will be fine. We can ride this out. There's just one problem. And that is that God doesn't look at people the way that people look at people. There's a story from the Jewish scriptures, the Old Testament, hundreds of years before the time of Jesus. There's this prophet Samuel, and God has tasked him with naming the next king of Israel. And he's got this lineup in front of him of young men. They're all good-looking, strong, intelligent guys. And Samuel's looking at them, and he's wondering, who's it supposed to be? And he asks God, who's the next king? Show me. And this is what God says. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. God doesn't look at people like people look at people. He sees right through the mask, right into our hearts. And I just think that Jesus would lean across the table and go, man, you're missing it. You're missing it here. The outside looks so good, but the inside is this mess of insecurities and prejudices and greed and lust and pride. And I think Jesus would say, let me in there. Let me in there. I believe Jesus wants to wash the dishes, the outside and the inside. And did you know that your heart can be changed? Did you know that Jesus desires to transform your heart, transform your thoughts, your motivations, your emotions even? That Jesus desires to get in there and transform not just the outside of your life, but the inside as well. And so what if Jesus is leaning across the table and just saying, you're missing it here. Let me in. Maybe it's time to take off the mask with Jesus and invite him into our hearts to do some tough cleaning. Now, something you may have noticed in this conversation is that Jesus is pretty harsh with his words. And it may feel different than the typical Jesus that we talk about, right? That's so full of compassion and love and inviting people to follow. Here he is harshly speaking to this Pharisee. What's up with that? Well, here's the deal. He's just getting started. But why is he being so harsh? Well, the next words that Jesus uses on the Pharisee, and understand he's going to attach this phrase to each of the next three images, gives us some clarity on the heart behind Jesus' harshness. And the phrase is, woe to you. And I'm not talking about like, whoa, like slow down. It's woe, W-O-E, woe to you, Pharisees. What does this mean? It's an incredibly strong statement. And it carries with it kind of two ideas. One is grief, deep sadness about what is going on. And the other is you are headed for disaster. You are headed for destruction. And I think the closest image I can give you of this is if you've ever been part of any sort of intervention, where you're sitting down with somebody that you care about, a friend, and you're like, dude, listen, you have got to stop the drinking. And you can see where it's headed. Everybody can see where it's headed, and your friend just doesn't see it. And honestly, you have very little hope that they're going to change their direction. And you know if they don't, it is headed for destruction. It is going to be bad. It's like sitting down with a close friend and just going, listen, this relationship that you're in, this person that's not your husband, that's not your wife, you got to stop. Please stop this. You can see where it's headed. Everybody can see where it's headed, and they just don't see it. And they're headed down this path, and you're like, oh man, you know where it's, this is woe. It's like this deep grief over what is happening, what's gonna happen, and this like, you have got to turn around. This is the heart behind Jesus' harsh words to this Pharisee. He says, "Woe to you, Pharisees." This is the heart. And now let's see what he's giving this statement about. "Woe to you, Pharisees, because you give God a tenth of your mint, rue, and all other garden herbs." He's talking about a tenth, which is like a tithe. He's saying, woe to you, destruction is heading your way because you're tithing your herbs. This is a conversation, second image, about the spices. Now, in first century Israel, the people were called by the law that God gave them to tithe, to give 1/10 of all of their crops. And they gave them to the priests who didn't have their own land. And they gave them to the temple to support the activity there. They gave them to support the poor. And the people did this. And the Pharisees were very meticulous about this. They tithed in this way. In fact, they took it so far that they would go out to their garden in the backyard and they would literally tithe their herbs, which was not really part of the prescribed law. I mean, imagine, honey, before you put that cilantro in the avocado guacamole, make sure you set aside a tenth for the temple. We want to make sure that they're just above and beyond, way above, way beyond all that they were required to tithe. And Jesus is like, woe to you. This doesn't make any sense, does it? I'm thinking, if they're getting woed over this, above and beyond giving, we might be in trouble, right? Those of us who don't give. Anyway, there's got to be more to this story. What's going on here? All right, check it out. Woe to you, you give a tenth of your mint and rue and all other kinds of garden herbs, but, and here it is, but you neglect, you're missing something. You neglect justice and the love of God. What he's saying here is it's possible to be financially generous without reflecting the generous heart of your God. That's what he's saying. He says, you should have practiced the latter without leaving the former undone. Yeah, you keep tithing, but you need to include the heart of God in your generosity. He's not saying, look, forget the tithing thing. Focus on expressing God's heart. No, it's both. Because financial generosity is an important component of expressing God's heart. But as you do that, do not neglect the heart of God. And he gives two characteristics that are core to who God is: justice and love. What exactly are we talking about here? Because this is important. If we're missing these things, it's important. So what is justice? I think justice is to make right. You're at Meijer, you go shopping, you get in your car, you're back up, bang, oops, just ran into somebody's taillight. What do? You wait for that person to come out, you leave a note so that you can make it right. Justice, to make right. In the 1960s in our country, there was the civil rights movement. African Americans in our countries were not experiencing all the rights that they should have had as citizens of our country. And the civil rights movement was a justice movement to make something that was wrong right. It's justice. It's a core component of God's character. And to be generous without seeking justice is to miss something. But there's also love. What is love? Love, to put the needs of others first. I don't think love is an emotion as much as it is an action. It's something that you do that looks a lot like serving others. That's love, core component of God's character. Don't be generous and neglect his justice and his love. And when you put justice and love together, what do you have? This is what I would say. You know they're together when you say your problem becomes my problem. When your pain becomes my pain, when your struggle becomes my struggle. And this is exactly what Jesus did for us. We had a problem. Sin, death. And Jesus said, I'm going to make your problem my problem. And he became a human being. And he experienced all the hardship that we experience in this broken planet. And then he took our sin literally on himself, and he went to the cross and he died in our place. Your problem has become my problem, and Jesus made us free at the cross. And when we experience the generous heart, the love of God, we're transformed and we begin to share that generosity with others. And this is why throughout history, Christians, followers of Jesus, have said, your problem has become my problem. And this is why early Christians invented hospitals for the poor and people who couldn't afford health care. That's why the first Christians would go out of the city gates to the dump in places like Ephesus, and they would pick up babies that had been abandoned. They would take them home. They would adopt them and raise them as their kids. Your problem has become my problem. It's why followers of Jesus spearheaded the abolition movement in Great Britain and the United States. Your problem has become my problem. It's why some of you have stepped up to become foster parents and adopt children. Your problem is my problem. It's why many of you have stepped up to be mentors in the elementary schools that we're partnering with. Your problem has become my problem. It's why so many of you volunteer here in our church in the city. It's why we took 150 middle school students downtown last week so that they could learn the generous heart of God. Your problem becomes my problem. This is what generosity in the model of Jesus looks like. And Jesus leans across the table at this Pharisee and he goes, you're missing it. You're absolutely missing it. You're missing my heart in your giving. Now, if you feel like Jesus is leaning across the table and speaking directly to you on this, what do? Well, there's a phrase that Pastor Jeff often uses that I think is really helpful here. And the phrase goes like this: start small and start close to home. Start small, start close to home. But let's not try to tackle world hunger this weekend. Let's think about what it would look like to say your problem becomes my problem at home. Maybe you try that with your parents. Your problem becomes my problem in your school, at your workplace. Your problem becomes my problem in your church or maybe in your city. Start small, start close to home, but start. Take a next step. And if you're looking for something clear, a clear next step, on our website, adabible.org/serving, there's two lists that you can find here. One is volunteer opportunities here within our church. You can find small group leading opportunities with students and kids in our men's ministry, hospitality, all kinds of serving opportunities here. And then also a list of organizations in our city that we think are fantastic, that are doing a good job of saying your problem becomes my problem, and they're doing great things to help people out in our city. Take a look at this and think about taking a next step. Start small, start close to home, but definitely start. But there might be something going on in your mind where it's like, okay, if I'm going to start being generous, not only with my money, but also with my time, if I'm going to start hanging out with people that have real needs, this could affect not only my time, this could affect my reputation. Yeah, that's right, it could. And so it's time to talk about the seats. Jesus wants to talk about the seats. Check this out. Hey, woe to you, Pharisees. There it is again. Woe to you, because you love the most important seats in the synagogues and respectful greetings in the marketplace. You love those special seats. It reminds me, I grew up in an older, more conservative kind of church. Maybe you did as well. And it reminds me, there was like this podium, the pastor would be preaching, and then there were like these chairs behind. Anybody remember this? It's like there's people sitting on those chairs facing the crowd. And I just remember sitting there going, who are those guys? They must be really important. Those guys must be a big deal. I think it was kind of like that. In the synagogue, there was like the general seating. And then there was this place where they would keep the Torah, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible. And then around, there was this like semicircular seating around the Torah where the most important people sat, and the Pharisees loved to be in those seats, and they loved to be respectfully greeted as important members of society in the marketplace. And Jesus had more to say about this thing that they were doing, where it was all about respect and what people think. And he said it. It's recorded for us in Matthew's gospel. Check this out. Everything they do, speaking of the Pharisees, is done for people to see. It's not done for God. It's for you to see and to be impressed. They make their phylacteries wide and the tassels on their garments long. Now, this is probably the weirdest verse you'll ever see in the Bible. What in the world is going on here? Phylacteries and tassels. Okay, so this is a group of Orthodox Jews in like today's times. And this thing right here on this guy's head, that's a phylactery. You can see it over here on the arm as well. They're these little leather boxes, and inside them, there are scriptures from the Hebrew scriptures to remind them who God is, who they are, and what it means to be his people. The same thing with the tassels. The tassels on the prayer shawl, they serve as a reminder. The Pharisees wore these. Now, the purpose is good, that you would constantly be reminded of who you are and who God is and what it means to be his people. But what the Pharisees were doing, which is so strange to me, is they were making these things really big. I mean, can you imagine this big old box on your head walking through the marketplace and your tassels like whoosh, really long, right? And they were doing this so that people would notice. It's like you see a Pharisee, you're like, wow, that is a serious phylactery, right? Like these guys are really devoted, and that was the idea. They were doing it to impress. I just get the impression that these Pharisees were all about elevating their own reputation. That when they walked into the room, they were looking for the best opportunity to elevate their status, elevate their reputation. Now, again, this is one of those times that you just look at the Pharisees and you're like, good night, these guys are idiots. But it's so much more helpful and painful to go, okay, where do I do this? Where do I do this in my life? And it just reminds me of a guy walking into a social gathering, scanning the room. Okay, who can I talk to? Who can I connect with? And he's thinking about business connections so that he can enhance and elevate his reputation, his status. It's a middle schooler, he's got the tray of food and wandering into the cafeteria. Okay, where do I sit so people know that I'm cool and not one of the weird kids? It's walking into a room, okay, what joke can I tell? What story can I tell so that people like me? It's wondering, okay, what can I wear that's gonna get me noticed, that's gonna get some heads turning? What can I post on Instagram that I'm gonna generate a lot of likes, a lot of comments? I mean, can we agree that we do this? I think if we're honest, so much of what we say, so much of what we do, so much of what we post is motivated by this desire to elevate our reputation. We want to be liked. We want to be noticed. Elevate our reputation. And it just reminds me of this other dinner with Jesus, with just Jesus and his disciples, and they're walking into the space where they're going to share this meal, and the disciples are arguing, jostling over who's going to sit where, who's going to have the most important, honorable seats. They walk into the space going, okay, what can I do? Where's my best opportunity to elevate my reputation and my status? And then it's like, well, where did Jesus go? Where's Jesus? He's in the corner. He's taking off his cloak, rolling up his sleeves. He's leaning down. He's got a pitcher of water in a basin. He's chosen the lowest position. He's taken the role of a servant. He's preparing to wash the feet of his disciples. Jesus, the creator, the sustainer of life, deliberately chooses the lowest place. Understand that when Jesus walks into a room, he's asking an entirely different question. Where's my best opportunity to elevate someone else's status? Where's my best opportunity to serve? I think Jesus would lean across the table and just go, you're missing it here. You're missing the very heart of what I'm about. It's not about elevating yourself. If anything, it's about lowering your status so that you can serve others. Now, the Apostle Paul, an important leader in the early church, has some important words to say about this. And I'm talking about the Apostle Paul, who was a Pharisee. left that movement, became a Jesus follower, planted churches all over the Mediterranean world. One of them was here in Philippi in northern Greece, where he wrote these important words for this conversation. In your relationships with one another, the way that you treat each other, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. You gotta think like Jesus, who, being in the very nature God, he's God, Jesus is God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. He did not take his status of divine status and use that for his advantage, but rather, he made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant. And being made in human likeness, he became a human being, found in the appearance of a man, he humbled himself, became obedient to death, even death on a cross. He made himself nothing. He emptied himself. He became a servant. It's like, look, you got two choices here. The mindset of a Pharisee, which is all about elevating your status and reputation, or the mindset of Christ, which is about lowering yourself so that you can raise others up. You got a choice to make. Mindset of the Pharisee, mindset of Christ. Now, if you just feel Jesus leaning across the table, speaking directly to you on this, can I offer a suggestion? These words, Philippians chapter 2, verses 5 through 8, write that down, put it in your phone, go home, look it up in Bible Gateway, look it up in your Bible, print it out, write it down, put it someplace that you can see it every day. Take next week, memorize those words. The mindset of Christ, and invite Jesus into your heart. Transform my heart. I need your mindset. I need to abandon this mindset of the Pharisees. I believe that Jesus desires to transform our hearts. Take this week and memorize those words as a next step in this area. But maybe you're thinking, you know what? I mean, it's bad, but it's normal. I mean, this is what it's like living in a fallen world. Sometimes we're about our own reputation. Yeah, sometimes the outside doesn't match the inside, but this is everybody. This is life. This is normal. I'm not sure it's worth getting all this worked up about. Is it really that big of a deal? We need to talk about what's at stake here in this conversation. What's at stake in missing the heart of Jesus? And to do that, we need to talk about the fourth image that Jesus gives, graves. Or maybe a better word here might be tombs. Because the ancient Jews, first century Jews, and especially the Pharisees, were obsessed with avoiding graves and tombs. And usually in Israel, it would be a tomb, like a cave carved out. That's where people were buried. They were so obsessed with avoiding them, staying away from them, that they painted tombs white, just so you could not accidentally walk into a cave. Oh, this seems nice. Ah, dead body. Like, no, whitewash it so that you know not to go there. And the reason had to do with uncleanliness, what we've already been talking about, this ceremonial hand washing thing. Now, to have dirty hands, to not do this, that was one level of uncleanness. To touch a dead body, that's like level 10. That's the worst one. In fact, some ancient Jewish writings called it the father of uncleanness. We probably would call it the mother of defilements. It's DEFCON 1, it's bad. If you touch a dead body, you have to do some things in order to be made pure. First thing you had to go through was 7 days in isolation, away from everybody. You also had to go through a purification ceremony, which involved killing a specific type of cow, and then the ashes of that burned cow sprinkled on you so that you could be pure. And if you didn't do these things, or until you did, you could not go into the courtyard of the temple. It means you were barred from the presence of God. You could not go there because you were unclean. And the Pharisees were so obsessed with this, so concerned about this, if they traveled into a different country, they would go through the whole thing, 7 days in isolation, purification, just in case. Just in case, walking down the road, they walked over an unmarked grave. That's how serious they were about this thing. Now, with all that in mind, let's look at what Jesus had to say to the Pharisees about unmarked graves. He says, "Woe to you, because you yourselves are like unmarked graves, which people walk over without knowing it. Do you feel the gravity of what Jesus is saying? You're so concerned about becoming defiled, but understand you are the ones doing the defiling. He leans across the table. You've been given positions of religious authority and influence over the people, and you think you're leading them. You say, do what we're doing, follow us, and you'll be close to God. But in reality, you're leading people into the worst kind of defilement. You're actually leading people away from God. And in Matthew, he puts it this way: woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. There it is again. You shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You slam the door on the presence of God in people's faces. What he's saying is there is a way of pursuing faith that's empty of the heart of God, that slams the door on the possibility of people around us coming to know Jesus. There is a way of expressing your faith without the heart of Jesus that when people look at it, they just go, that's what it looks like to follow Jesus? That's what Jesus is all about? No thanks, I'm out. It is possible to do this. And I think we do it in the way that we talk about people. People we disagree with, people who don't believe the same things as us, and we speak without the heart of God in our words. And it's in the way that we treat people when it's empty of the heart of God. It's when we use the words of Jesus as if they're a weapon. It is possible to express your faith in a way that's devoid of the heart of God, that just repels people, slams the door on the possibility of them coming to faith. This is what is at stake in this conversation. And I'm talking about your neighbors, I'm talking about your friends, your coworkers, I'm talking about your kids. This version of Christianity that's devoid of the heart of God, that's just missing the heart of God, it can shut the door on people coming to know Jesus. That's what's at stake here. And so today we've been exploring this dinner with Jesus, and unlike some of the stories we've been looking at, it's not a table of fellowship. It's not a table of invitation. It's a table of correction, harsh words from Jesus today. And I wonder if you've ever sat at a table of correction, because I have. As a teenager, dining room table, just me and my dad. And I hated these conversations. It's like, hey, can we talk about who you've been hanging out with? Can we talk about what you've been watching lately? Hey, we need to talk about what you said to your sister. Can we talk about this girl you've been dating? Your mom and I don't think that she's good for you. And if you're worried, she doesn't attend here. I want to throw that out. This campus, she doesn't attend. I'm kidding, absolutely kidding. Man, I hated those conversations. They made me so mad. And it would be like 3 or 4 hours later that I would have the ultimate comeback. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's like, oh, if I just would have said this, I could have got him. But I listened. I listened to him at the table of correction, and looking back a few years down the road, especially now that I have my own kids, I can see with clarity that sometimes the most loving thing that a father can do for their kid is sit them down at the table of correction and just go, you're missing it here. You're so missing it. And I can understand the heart behind that conversation. It's like, please, you gotta listen to me because you don't see it, but this is where this is headed, and it's really bad, and it's really gonna hurt, and it's gonna lead to a lot of regret. And I just know that those conversations saved me a lot of pain. And I think that's what kind of conversation this is at the table of correction with Jesus today. I just hope and I pray that as God speaks to your heart, that you would be open, that you would trust him as a good father, that you would listen as he says, you're missing it here. That you would listen and that you would respond. I would love to pray for you as we wrap up our time together. God, this has been a tough conversation. I confess that I much prefer to listen to the inviting, gracious words of Jesus, but at the same time, I recognize that these words are also grace. That these hard words are also part of your goodness and your love. God, would you give us open hearts? Would you give us humility? And God, those of us who just know that you're speaking to us in certain areas of our lives, would you surround us with people that could give us good counsel, encouragement? God, would you give us the courage to choose what is right, even though it's not easy? And God, we're so grateful for Jesus, that through your Son that you made our problem your problem. God, we're so grateful. And so we just honor you, and we pray all this in the name of Jesus. Amen. Hey, thanks so much for being here. It was great being with you this weekend. I hope you have a great rest of your weekend. We'll see you next time.